"Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the dock." That's what the cop said, his hand drifting toward his belt, and instead of freezing like some guilty trespasser, I started laughing, not the nervous giggle of a guy caught doing something wrong, but that low, disbelieving laugh you make when life suddenly reveals the punchline to a joke it's been setting up behind your back for months. Because 30 seconds earlier, Sabrina Caldwell, Queen Bee of the Cedar Ridge Shores Association, had been shrieking from her $1 million deck about how I didn't belong on her lake, how I was trespassing on community property, her voice cutting across Cedar Ridge Lake like a siren, and now she stood there with her arms folded, waiting to see me hauled off in cuffs, completely unaware that the guy she was trying to get arrested literally owned the water under her fancy shoreline. My name is Logan Mercer, 52, retired electrician from Phoenix, and 3 months before that moment, I was just a widower pacing through a house full of ghosts, every room still soaked in Emily's lavender lotion and hospital antiseptic, that cruel scent that can buckle your knees faster than any live current. Then a random Tuesday brings a thick envelope, estate auction notice. Uncle Warren, my dad's hermit brother who'd lived on some lake in Wyoming for 40 years and never forgot my birthday, had died. His property was going up for auction, Cedar Ridge Lake Reserve parcel with territorial water rights. Minimum bid $150,000. I didn't know what a lake reserve really meant, but I had $180,000 of Emily's life insurance sitting in my account like a weight, and I could almost hear her in my head. "Logan, for once in your life, take a risk." So I drove north, traded Phoenix heat and smog for sharp mountain air that actually felt like it was cleaning my lungs, and when I pulled up to the cabin, I understood why Uncle Warren had stayed. A modest 1960s place on 3 quiet acres, a weathered cedar dock reaching out into water, so clear you could count rocks 15 feet down. Every plank on that dock had his handwriting in it, every joint fitted like furniture, and for the first time since the funeral, my chest loosened. What nobody announced over the auction mic was that my little reserve parcel sat at the heart of Cedar Ridge Shores. 47 luxury homes wrapped around the lake like a necklace made of granite countertops and boat lifts, each one sold with exclusive lake access as its crown jewel. When the gavel came down at $150,000, I thought I'd scored cheap lakefront peace. I had no idea I'd just bought the main artery to their dream. Week 2, I'm out on the dock replacing rotten boards, breathing in fresh cedar, trying to remember what it feels like to work with my hands for something other than a paycheck. When she appears, Sabrina Caldwell, without knocking, clipboard and tape measure, designer gym outfit, perfect blonde hair, smile sharp enough to cut fishing line. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge Shores," she chirps. "I'm Sabrina, HOA president. We need to address some compliance issues with your dock." She reads off violations like a prosecutor, setback requirements, aesthetic standards, community harmony, all aimed squarely at Uncle Warren's dock, the one that came with my clear title purchase. She calls him difficult, says she hopes I'll be more reasonable. I wipe sawdust off my hands, look her in the eye, and tell her I bought this at public auction. I have a clear deed, and before she starts writing tickets, I'd like to figure out what I actually own. Her smile goes from sunny to January in about 2 seconds. "Mr. Mercer, Cedar Ridge Shores is a premier community. Our average home value is $1.2 million. We don't have rules, we have standards." In that moment, I stop being a neighbor and start being a problem. 3 days later, she's back with backup, a supposed state environmental inspector named Trent Halpern, in a crooked, logo polo and khakis, poking at my dock, snapping photos of perfectly normal posts, asking how deep the lake is, whether I'm planning major projects, if I've seen unusual wildlife patterns, while he stares at a totally average duck like it owes him money. The smell of fake is stronger than the pine needles. While Trent is pretending to measure, I call the Wyoming Office of Environmental Compliance on speaker, politely ask if they scheduled an inspection at Cedar Ridge Lake and whether they employ a Trent Halpern. The woman on the line says no to both. I repeat that nice and loud. Trent goes sheet white, drops his clipboard, and full on sprints to his truck, a Halpern Fine Furnishings delivery vehicle, and peels out of my drive. On the gravel, he leaves a laminated ID that wouldn't fool a board security guard. Sabrina doesn't apologize. She says I intimidated official personnel, claims community standards supersede state regulations, And when she hisses that my property should belong to the neighborhood, something in me flips. That night, I send my deed to a water law attorney named Rachel Kincaid. After an hour of digging, she tells me I'm not standing on a problem, I'm standing on a loaded cannon. Buried in that paperwork is a phrase nobody at the auction bothered to explain: territorial water extraction rights. And that's where the story stops being about a dock and becomes about 47 houses floating on someone else's water. A few days later, a dusty pickup pulls into my driveway. Out steps Colton Reyes, local surveyor and part-time fishing guide, boots worn, gear rattling in the back, the kind of man who actually understands land instead of just photographing it for listings. He's heard Sabrina is declaring war over her lake, and he's curious about my deed, especially that phrase territorial water extraction rights. 20 minutes later, my kitchen table is covered in maps, statutes on Colton's laptop, and Cedar Ridge Lake looks different to me forever. Those faded blue lines on an 1887 survey map, every underground spring feeding the lake starts on my land. Every drop glinting under Sabrina's deck flows through my dirt first. Colton explains it. Territorial water rights were granted before statehood. They override later zoning and HOA rules, and they stick to the land forever unless someone buys them properly. The developer who built Cedar Ridge Shores in the 90s never did. They just assumed the lake was fair game. Suddenly, Sabrina's panic isn't just arrogance. It's survival. Down in Uncle Warren's basement, a cave of pipe tobacco stink, old bait, and metal filing cabinets, I find proof he knew all this. One drawer marked Water Rights is stuffed with correspondence, including a carbon copy letter to a surveyor named Helen Carrington from 1994. In it, Warren casually states that the developer skipped the water rights, that his 1880s grant still controls every spring, that he's willing to share, but someone should know the truth in case trouble shows up. Trouble showed up in leggings. Helen is still alive. When I call, she laughs sadly and says, "Son, you didn't just inherit a cabin, you inherited the kill switch to Cedar Ridge Shores. Legally, I can control extraction, distribution, access. If I wanted to, I could shut off their entire supply tomorrow." Then I meet with Rachel Kincaid in person. Her office smells like leather and expensive coffee, and when she finishes reading Uncle Warren's archive, she leans back and tells me she's never seen rights this clean and powerful. She lays out my choices: go nuclear and demand $3+ million in back usage, be the generous dictator, forgive the past and set fair monthly rates, or play psychological chess, show them what I could do and invite them to cooperate instead of getting crushed. While we plan, Sabrina escalates. First, I find my dock ropes sliced clean. Then support posts mysteriously loosened so the whole structure creaks under my weight. Then trespasser appears in wobbly red spray paint across Warren's planks. No one thing big enough to make the evening news. All of it aimed at one message: leave. Colton recognizes the pattern and shows up with a trunk full of trail cameras, motion sensors, audio recorders. We turn my place into a quiet surveillance bunker. At 2:30 a.m., we finally see our ghost, a figure in dark clothes slipping onto my property with wire cutters and spray paint. The cameras catch everything, but the real jackpot is the audio. His phone rings, and we hear his voice. "Yeah, Mom, I'm almost done with the dock, the red paint like you wanted, and you promised me $2,000 from the emergency fund, remember?" Bradley Caldwell, 19, Sabrina's son, buying junk food and bad decisions with stolen HOA money. The next morning, I sit across from him in the town coffee shop, slide my phone across the table, hit play, and his whole act collapses. Between sobs and spilled espresso, he tells me the rest. This isn't a one-off campaign. It's Sabrina's business model. 3 other families over the years, all targeted when they questioned her, all harassed until they sold cheap. All their distressed homes handled by her real estate firm for a tidy profit. She calls it community improvement, he mutters, says some people just don't fit Cedar Ridge Shores. That's when this stops being about me and becomes about everyone she's crushed. With Rachel, Colton, a private investigator named Nate Holloway, and later Rachel's partner Evan Cole, we build a case: vandalism, embezzlement, fake inspections, false reports, HOA funds quietly bleeding into Sabrina's gambling losses and bad investments. A media consultant, Lauren Pierce, preps me for cameras, and we draft certified letters to each homeowner. Starting next month, water access will cost $847 unless we agree to something better. Same day, Sabrina blasts an emergency community meeting flyer, paints me as a dangerous outsider threatening their kids and water, invites Metro 9 News to film her starring role. That's how Olivia Trent walks into the clubhouse, investigative reporter with a nose for municipal rot. I hand her a folder with century-old rights, bank statements, and a harassment timeline. She reads in silence, then looks up and says, "Mr. Mercer, this isn't a feud. This is organized crime in yoga pants." She adds one more twist. The FBI is already watching Sabrina for HOA fraud in Oregon and Idaho. They're just waiting for one last act of arrogance. And Sabrina is about to deliver it live on camera. The night of the meeting, the Cedar Ridge Shores clubhouse is jammed. 3 of 7 homeowners, Metro 9 News cameras, the air thick with perfume, coffee, and fear. Sabrina sits at the front table like a general before battle, dressed to win, eyes bright with the certainty that she's about to bury me. She opens strong, talks about community under siege, threats to our children, extortion disguised as legal claims. She shows a slide of my cabin with dangerous individual written underneath, calls residents up to tell carefully rehearsed stories about me shouting at their kids, acting unstable after Emily's death, damaging property. None of it true, all of it designed to turn me into a monster. Then she waves my water rights letter and calls me an extortionist demanding nearly $1,000 a month for something they've always had. For a moment, the room tilts toward her. Then I stand. I walk to the mic with Uncle Warren's leather portfolio, feel every eye on me, every camera focused, and I tell them I didn't come here to fight anyone. I came because my wife died, and I needed a place quiet enough to hear my own thoughts again. Then I lay the deed on the podium. I explain, slowly, that in the 1880s the Wyoming Territory granted the land I now own exclusive rights to all underground springs feeding Cedar Ridge Lake, that developers in the 90s built Cedar Ridge Shores without ever buying those rights, that for 30 years they've all been using water that legally flows through my name. We project Colton's maps, the blue veins from my hillside to their foundations. You could hear the air leave the room. Rachel joins me, introduces herself, explains how territorial rights outrank zoning, HOA bylaws, modern permits. Calm, precise, deadly. Then she opens her briefcase and drops the hammer. The audio of Sabrina offering me $75,000 in cash from the HOA emergency fund if I'll relocate. The night vision video of Bradley cutting ropes, spray painting my dock, whining on the phone about being underpaid for security work. The bank records showing HOA money quietly wired into Sabrina's personal accounts to cover gambling and bad investments. Neighbors who were glaring at me 30 minutes earlier now swivel toward her like they're seeing her for the first time. She tries to grab the mic, screams that the evidence is fake, that I'm manipulating everyone, that ancient technicalities don't matter, but Deputy Harris, who's been standing at the back with a folder of his own, steps forward, reads out charges for embezzlement and filing false police reports, and cuffs her right there under the fluorescent lights. You could taste the shock. When the door shuts behind her, I take a breath and give them the choice Rachel and I crafted. Legally, I can demand about $3.4 million in back fees and shut off anyone who doesn't pay, and every judge in the state would back me. Or we can wipe the past clean. No back charges. Instead, we set fair monthly rates, scaled from $200 for modest homes up to $600 for lakefront mansions. Every dollar going into the Emily Mercer Conservation and Scholarship Fund, a trust to protect the lake and send local kids who care about the environment to college. They vote within weeks. The old Cedar Ridge Shores Association dissolves and reforms with new leadership, term limits, mandatory audits. Their first unanimous act is signing that water agreement. Olivia's story hits the air that same night. Not angry widower holding neighborhood hostage, but HOA president arrested in multi-state fraud after ignoring 19th century water rights. The clip goes viral, #water rights reckoning trends, and suddenly my inbox is overflowing with people who thought they were alone in their HOA nightmares. The FBI folds our evidence into their existing case. Sabrina takes a plea, 24 months in federal prison, full restitution, real estate license revoked in multiple states. Bradley doesn't follow her path. Instead, he takes a deal, community service under our conservation program. Somewhere between repairing shoreline, hauling trash, and teaching kids from town how to fish off the public access dock I donated. The kid who once vandalized Uncle Warren's dock becomes the guy reminding everyone to respect the water. A year later, Cedar Ridge Lake looks like the place Warren always believed it could be. The water's clearer, the banks are healthier. The Emily Mercer Fund has already helped 15 students, including Monica's daughter Lily, who now wants to study environmental law, like Mr. Logan's friends. Every fall, we host a conservation festival on that donated shoreline. Barbecue smoke over cold water, kids laughing where jet skis used to tear through, local bands playing while trout rise to the surface at dusk. Rachel writes a book, Guarding Your Home, Beating HOA Abuse. Law schools teach our case. And Colton ends up marrying Olivia by the lake, saying their vows under string lights reflected in the very water that nearly became a weapon. Most mornings, I sit at the end of Warren's dock with my coffee, watching mist lift off water that's legally mine, but morally belongs to everyone who treats it right. And I hear Emily in my head, telling me the same thing I've finally learned. Real power isn't about how hard you can squeeze. It's about how wisely you decide to let go. I could have turned off their taps, demanded every dollar the law said I was owed, and walked away the winner. But instead we built something that'll outlive all of us. So let me ask you this. If you found out, one ordinary morning, that you held the invisible switch to your neighbor's comfort and security, would you flip it out of revenge, or would you do what we did on Cedar Ridge Lake and turn that power into something that finally feels like justice?